Welcome to the Humans Against Poor Scholarship Summer Grant Interviews. Each one of our interviewees is competing for a $2,000 grant to help fund their summer research. Do you want to have a say in who gets funded? Become a HAPS donor today by visiting www.hapsfund.com/donate.
Is David ready? Okay. Hi, I'm Melina. I'm leading the interviews for this round. So why don't we go ahead and get started? David, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi Melina. Thank you for inviting me this evening. So my name is David Snook. I'm based in the University of Wales, Trinity St David's in Lampeter, and I'm a first year Ph.D. student, and in archaeology, history, and anthropology. So, sorry, Melina, I can't hear you.
No worries. That's awesome. So why don't you go ahead and take us through your research and what you got you interested in it?
Yeah. So I'm at the very I have to say I'm at the very early stages at the moment. I started my research in February this year, but so far my research has taken me to the late Bronze Age Cyprus, mainly the urban centres within Cyprus during the late Bronze Age, which coincides with the late Cypriot 1 to 3, so that's 1600 to say 1150 BC. Now, this was for Cyprus a very transformative time. It was when you see this distinct change in material culture. You get this influx of exotic material goods. You have ivories, glass, faience, silver, all sorts of precious materials and finished objects coming into these urban centres, and most of what you see are personal, are items, such as jewelry, bowls, just very intimate, tangible objects. So what interests me with that material is how the people interacted with that, how it sort of changed their identities and their lived experiences, during that period. But then the second strand is also looking at those wider interactions and placing Cyprus within the wider context of the East Mediterranean, especially to the Levantine urban centres and to Egypt. From what I understand so far, there's a multitude of assemblages I could look at. One of the but it hasn't been explored in in a lot, in a lot of depth in this context. Like one of the works that really inspired me during my undergrad years was Marion Feldman, Diplomacy by Design, and it was that work that really had me thinking, well, how did this globalized system work? What were the and sort of looking at the structures of social communication, social memory, ideas of status and power, and you sort of see all these things. You sort of see all these things mediated and expressed through these through these highly prized exotic materials, and the rituals that tend to go along with them. So like feasting, drinking, especially in the funerary context. One of them, one of the main areas in Cyprus that I hope to look at is encomi, which was a product of that period. You have a mortuary context that is sort of integrated within the urban centre itself, and these varying cultural influences and ideas, which I find very interesting. So yeah, as I said, I'm at the very early stages at the moment, but I'm sort of playing around with all these ideas and all these materials that I really hope to explore over the next few years, and sort of tie these theories and the materiality together to sort of bring Cyprus within the context of the wider East Mediterranean, but also the lived experiences of the people within Cyprus during that time.
Awesome. That's really impressive to hear. You've done a lot of the background research already. Yeah. So what would you do with the funding for a project this summer specifically?
Yeah. So yes. I'm researching part-time, and I am mostly self-funded. So this grant would certainly help me to go and research this. One of the main goals is for this summer, once I've submitted my PhD proposal, is to go and research the research the Cypriot collections in the British Museum, most of the collections from there, from sites such as Encomi, Hallan, it's the pronunciation, Hallan's Sultan Teke, Kition, and Paliapathos. So there's a rich body of material that you can study there. So far, I've only been able to explore it through the digital archives, but I feel like I would actually need to see the objects and catalog, and gather the data in that way.
Yeah, and what are you hoping to? What sorts of questions are you going to ask about the objects specifically? Are you focusing on a certain material or a certain object category, or just broad?
So I think it will end up being broad, but there are certain categories of materials. From what I've seen so far, there's a large collection of gold jewelry. There's rings, seal stamps. There's carved ivories. There are these. It will be a focus on sort of small, tangible objects of that that plays an important role in people's everyday lives and sort of in the afterlife as well. But it's I'd also like to look at craftsmanship and the links with with the Near East, so, how the ideas flowed, how they changed, how they were exchanged and hybridized. What else is there? And also there's been very little research that I've come across concerning glass and ivory found in the tombs at that time. So this was a new technology that was part of this cultural milieu of of exchange within these elite networks. So I'd like to be able to have the chance to explore that a little, I think.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
What context are all the assemblages you're talking about? Are they funerary or are there different ones?
So the majority of the assemblages are funerary. So say the British the British Museum collection is largely from excavations from mortuary contexts during the 20th century, and they were in graves. It's hard to identify individuals in Cyprus because of the secondary burial practices within Cyprus during that time. But but I think on the odd occasion you do find things in sanctuaries, and in domestic contexts as well.
All right, and so we have an audience question. Can you tell us about plastered skulls in the pre-pottery Neolithic B? It sounds like the skulls were used as drinking vessels.
I did study that in my undergrad. We're trying to remember now. Yes, I think that was more to do with sort of revitalizing the ancestors. It was a way of preserving the ancestors and ensuring their presence within that community. And I think you see that within it seems like they had a life within that community, but then they were also deposited in a way that they were also present within the community for as well. So as far as I can remember, they were deposited within emptied houses. But yeah, this is way further than what I'm studying at the moment.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think too, looking at the personal adornments, because those are so variable, but also they probably have a continuity that runs through them. Do you think you can see that possibly between the sites?
I mean, the interesting thing about the jewelry is that you, especially with the diadems, you get these gold diadems that were placed on the person after death. But the interesting thing is that they tend to have these simplistic motifs like rosettes and spirals that you can find right throughout the Near East, right through the East Mediterranean, and I think I think it'd be interesting to explore what the meaning was behind that. Why? I'm sorry, I've hit a dead end.
No worries. You answered the question. I guess one last question, if there are no audience ones. Have you considered the role of ships or shipwrecks, and how that could contribute to your research?
I mean, the sea trade was the critical component in in the East Mediterranean. This type of society might not have developed if it wasn't for this seafaring culture. I personally don't know much about that at the moment, but that's another avenue I'd like to explore as well. Just to sort of get a context of the networks of exchange and the types of materials that were being exchanged as well. So I know, for example, with Cyprus, you have bronze being exported to all around the East Mediterranean, but then say you have this influx then of material goods that might have been exchanged, as part of this system of seafaring, So sorry, I had two strands at the same time then. So no, I was thinking about Mary Helm's Ulysses Sail, and it's about this. It's the thought that long distance trade and exchange networks sort of provide or imbue value on objects that are being gathered from distant land. There might be esoteric knowledge that's imbued with those, and certain practices as well. So, so with the faience, the jewelry, there's certain types of pottery that might be imported, like the Mycenaean craters with and the Canaanite drinking vessels. So it's a very complex system, and seafaring was at the heart of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for answering all these questions. Yeah. Your research sounds really great. I think we'll let you go now, but thanks for being here.
Okay, thank you, Melina. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Okay, bye now.
All right. So, hi, Natalie. How are you doing?
Hi, Melina. Really good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and take us through your research?
Sure. So my name's Natalie Boyd, and I'm studying at the University of Wales Trinity St David, just like David was a minute ago. And I also started in February, so super shiny new. I'm looking at a collection of ivories from a place called Hassanli in northwestern Iran, and I was drawn into it because you've got all these fabulous ivory assemblages and some amazing work that's been done from Nimrud and across Assyria and Megiddo ivories, everything like that. But the Hassanlu ones, there hasn't been much done on them since 1980 when the catalogue was published. So I thought they'd be a really nice one to try and bring up to date with everything else. And it's an interesting area because they're right on the edge of Assyria, but also right on the border with Urartu. So lots of possibilities for different cultural influences and things going on.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So this is Iron Age?
Yeah, Iron Age. There was a total destruction around 800 BC. So there are lots of nicely sealed layers where the things have just been totally preserved. So yeah, it's really nice to see.
That's super interesting. What context are these ivories found in?
A lot of them seem to be in temple contexts, but whether they were used there or whether they were stored there is part of what I'm hoping to find out.
Yeah. Are they large objects, small objects? What kind are you working with?
Most of them, yeah, would be portable, but they would have been parts of furniture. There are some figurines and things like that, but yeah, mostly plates and things that would have formed part of furniture, as far as I can tell so far. I'm not deep into it yet.
No, that makes sense.
Little pots and things as well. So.
Yeah. So what would you do with the funding? What is this summer project you're working on?
So the summer project I would like to do is a bit of a tangent, but it's come from the fact that during everything that's been going on for the past year, travel's not really been an option, and museums haven't been able to let us all in. So what I would like to do is to do some trials with 3D printing of some objects, some Near Eastern objects from museums near me. And if those are successful, then hopefully work with getting enough photographic imagery from the Pen and Met museums and the Tehran Museum to maybe make up some of the ivories that would have formed part of the assemblage from Hassanli.
Awesome. That's really impressive. Are there a lot of museums near you that are working on 3D scanning? I know it's taking off in the field.
Not as far as I know, but I've been working as an archaeologist and archivist in the commercial sector for the last 10 years. So I've been really lucky that I know a lot of the curators. And then a shout out to Sean, who's one of the guys that I work with. He does a lot of 3D printing as a hobby. He does it for cosplay and things like that. So he would help me marry the two together. So we've got access to objects to do it, and then we've got access to the printer to try and generate these objects. But yeah, it excites me because it's something that if it works, it wouldn't just benefit me, because it could become a handling collection to show people in schools, to teach them about this area, and even to relate to the local community in Hassanlu and say, you know, these are the things that were found in your area, and really engage them with the archaeology. So I'm really excited in the community engagement side as well as studying materials themselves.
Yeah, that would be really interesting. I mean, there's a lot to talk about here. Do you think you're going to find influences from Urartu or the Assyrians?
I hope so. So when they were looked at before, a lot of them were put down as being Assyrian or of Assyrian influence, and also some from Syria. They'd travelled across that way. There don't seem to be that many ivories from Urartu or comparisons done that way. But then there's also central and southern Iran, and they don't seem to have been looked at in the same way. So there's a whole network that's waiting to be uncovered. And I know that there are Iranian archaeologists who are working on sites around that area now. So there's more and more information all the time that can hopefully let me know more whether there is a local style or where the influences and trade links were that were bringing these things in, or showing the artists and giving them inspiration.
Yeah. Going back to the 3D scanning, I'll just kind of ping pong between both of them. Do you think ivories would be, do you think they're going to scan well Or do you think it could be a little troubling? Because I know some people have had trouble with bones being too reflective.
Yeah. So I'm hoping that a lot of them, because they were in a destructive layer, they've been burned. So they're black and they're ashy, and so I'm hoping that might reduce some of the reflection. But there are some, not the right period, but there are some ivories in the Exeter Museum, which is near me. So I'm planning on doing a few tests on them just to see whether they would show up or whether they are problematic, and then we can just try and focus on whether the burnt ones would work better.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So if we don't have any audience questions, I'll just keep going. So can you tell by what an ivory object is? Like if you have a piece, can you potentially tell what piece of furniture it went into, or at least what part of a lower piece of wood or something else that it could have been attached to?
Yeah, hopefully. There are some really nice ones from Cyprus. From Salamis, there's a whole bed. And then elsewhere in Cyprus, there are chairs and thrones and things, and similar across the Near East. So I'm hoping that by looking at the shapes and maybe comparable designs, that we can say, well, actually, we tend to see these on chairs, so this probably came from a chair. I know there's one that's like a lion, but it looks like it's the leg of a piece of furniture. So something like that might be helpful in working out what that was.
Yeah. Do you maybe want to elaborate on the greater context of Hasanlu and kind of what its role was in the local or regional area during the Iron Age?
Sure. So it's a bit of a mystery at the moment. It was excavated first in the 1930s, and then from the 1950s through to the 70s. The thought was that it was mainly an Assyrian, not part of the empire, but it's because it's beyond the fringes really, but it was thought that the influence was probably more from that way. And then the destruction was caused by the Iratians coming in and destroying it to then take over that area. But it's a bit, who really knows what was going on? But the more that's going on in the area, I think the more the picture will build up of how they related to other areas and what was actually going on surrounding Hasanlu itself, because it must have been part of a local network rather than constantly reaching further away.
Yeah. So how big is the ivory collection?
I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I do know. I think it's around 800 pieces. So there's quite a bit there. Some of it's raw, some of it's decorated, and some of it there aren't full records online. So that would be like a further project, would then be to try and fully record the entire assemblage so that information could be made public.
Yeah. And would it be possible, or does 3D printing open the opportunity for people to maybe scan something in one place and then send you a file so you print it there?
Yeah, that would be my plan, because it's hopefully I'll be able to travel to the States in the next couple of years and see some of this stuff for myself. But if not, then hopefully we would be able to do it in the data transfer way. I also know that it would be quite difficult to access the collections in Tehran. So hopefully I can work with them to do a similar thing. And it would also mean that the items that have been in America for all these years, possibly we could put a handling collection in Tehran and vice versa. So hopefully it could open up that kind of an exchange and network as well.
Yeah, that sounds great. All right, audience question. Do we know what animals the ivory came from, and does that suggest where they may have been made?
So it's from the date of them. I think it's more likely to be elephant. And you can also tell from the color with some of them. I think if they're really white, and that tends to be the older ones, they would be hippo ivory. And then if they're slightly yellow, that tends to be elephant ivory and later. There were elephants around in the Near East at that time. You see lots of the big hunting images in the Assyrian Empire. So It's possible from that area, but it's also possible a lot of stuff did come from Egypt, so there's possibly a connection there.
And another question, is it difficult for archaeologists to ship pieces of ivory? Do they have to prove with documentation to show that ivory is from antiquity?
It's not something I know a huge amount about. I would think that because a lot of this has been in the museum for a number of years, it's not something they've had to contend with so far. But yeah, absolutely, it is something that in recent years, yeah, it is difficult. How do you demonstrate that? So it's important that we keep site records and as much information as we can to show what we're finding, where we're finding it, and the other datable evidence to prove when it's from, to try and avoid these issues.
Yeah. Do you think, is there a way, so you said that a lot of the ivories were burned, so they're black now, which kind of takes away the ability to tell if it's more white or more yellow. Is there a way around that, or is it kind of just, is that something you can't get to anymore from the burned ones?
I'm not sure. That's not something I've played around with yet. I've been more thinking about the designs and what the designs can tell me about who may have made them and why they made them and what they were for. But that's definitely something to consider. Like how far in can we tell before they're too far past the point?
Yeah. Any more audience questions? I don't see any. I guess one or two final ones from me. Do you think that ivory objects, we see them in such abundance that it almost is like, is it really considered this kind of elite good, or is it more everyday? Do you have any opinions on that?
I think definitely for Stanley, because they're predominantly found in the temple, I think there's definitely something special about them. Whether they knew that this invasion was coming and they've stored all of their precious goods, or whether they always kept them there, I'm not sure. But either way, to be storing them there or to be putting them somewhere safe, there must have been some power and value to them. Yeah, so it's, I'm not sure how abundant they would have been at this point. So yeah, that's definitely a really good question, and one that I need to, or one that I want to find out more about. Who owned them, who used them, and how exclusive were they?
Yeah, well, it's interesting that they're kind of found in this like catchment sense instead of being taken with people. So
yeah,
interesting side of things. Well, I think that's about it. Thank you so much, Natalie, for this. This has been
thank you for having me.
Great to hear about, and looking forward to hearing more about your research in the future.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
Hi, Thomas.
Hi, Melina.
How are you doing?
Not too bad. Yourself?
Good. So why don't you go ahead and tell us about yourself and introduce us to your research?
Alrighty. Well, my name is Thomas Humphrey. I'm a student at University of Wales, Trinity St. David in the United Kingdom. My research is predominantly regarding cylinder seals on late Bronze Age Cyprus and their relationship to the expression of and the development of elite identities during the period. The reason I is because they are they were developed in the Middle East initially, dating back to about the third millennium at the earliest in Iran and southern Iraq, and they became one of the predominant administrative tools in the region right up through to the end of the late Bronze Age. But the thing with Cyprus is they didn't get introduced until about the 17th century BCE, and within about a century of foreign imports having arrived, they had already developed their own glyptic tradition with their own twists and innovations on traditional iconography from neighbors, but also with their own motifs that they had developed. And one of the things that I am looking at in my research is the relationship between that and with a foreignly introduced object class, and how it became so embroiled so quickly within the local material culture tradition, and how that reflects on both human and object agencies, and how that relationship works with identities. Yeah, so that's basically it in a nutshell. I've been looking at seals from the British Museum and all over the UK, as well as those available in digital collections around the world, and just looking at, because there's been a lot of work that's been done on typologizing them, and also Joanna Smith has done some fantastic work in looking at layered seals and recarving and the relationship between cylinder seals and authority. The tricky thing is, though, that we have almost no sealings from Cyprus, whereas at Hattusa, from one site or from one building, there's over 3,500 ceilings rather. From site to for a whole island, not just one site, we've got two ceilings. One of which was from the late Cypriot II period, which is about 14th century. And it was reused as part of the flooring for one of the ashlar buildings at Enkami, which is on the west coast, east coast. I always get the directions mixed up. The second one was a old Babylonian cylinder seal, so it was an import that was used to mark a pithos neck. In contrast, 200 seals were found at Enkami alone. There's upwards of 600 from the island that are well attested, and a significant probably are well. We have proper provenance data on links, whereas at sites like Ugarit, where cylinder seals were also incredibly common, there's dozens of sealings. So we're not quite sure what they were used for. There's theories that they were either purely for dormant or ceremonial reasons, or apotropaic, so amulets of protection. But also there's theories that they were administrative tools, and we just don't have the surviving evidence for perhaps it was in wax. They were used to, runs into the issue of these were official documents that were typically sealed in the Near East and whatnot, usually on clay tablets. And wax, well, if you've got a signature at the bottom of something and it's written in pencil, you can just change it. So the level of authenticity and authority that would be conveyed via wax tablets is there's some I wouldn't say problems, but I think it needs a bit more thought. Whereas you've got, so we're not quite sure what they were being used for, despite the fact that they start appearing in pretty much every major site and some not so major sites. The majority of them is from the coastal area, but that's also can be an accident of discovery, because that's heavily excavated part of the island is the coastal sites. But they're in settlement contexts, funerary contexts, and sanctuary contexts. So they were being used for something that wasn't just, ooh, look, shiny, because it's just too involved. One site that I've been looking at is Gaios Yakovos Dima, which was a late Bronze Age sanctuary site in the north of the island near the Karelian Mountains, that was excavated in the 30s or the late 20s and early 30s by the Swedish Cyprus. It was either used for a very short period of time, or it was used for a single site. There's debate regarding the exact number, if you will, but it's fairly certain that it was used for at least a very short period of time on the scale of weeks or months, years or decades. And there's 3 cylinder seals from the site. One of which is, 2 of which were elaborate style, so they're very, I'm not going to say fancy, but they're very clear engraving, very elaborate in terms of their iconography and the dress of the figures and the level of detail. One of which was derivative, which is equally impressive, but it's got a more schematic look to it. All 3 were hematite. One of the elaborate style seals was turned into a necklace, whereas the other one was just free floating, if you will. So even with 2 seals that look very similar, have very similar iconography, and are of the same material at the same site, they were obviously considered differently. One was grouped, the necklace seal was grouped with other jewelry, whereas the other elaborate style seal and the derivative style seal were grouped with different object classes. So even just among those offerings, they were considered differently. But at the same time, all 3 of them have similar schema to them. They all deal with the supernatural in some sense. What that actually means in terms of Cypriot society and the rituals being undertaken at this site, we're not sure. Cypriots interfaced with these objects is complex, not well understood, and it's got, I think there's a great deal of room to explore how both the human agencies and the object agencies have intersected to have both performed and worked these into elite identities, especially seeing as they were just wholeheartedly adopted over less than a century.
Yeah, that's very soon, time-wise, in the context we look at. So what would your summer plan be? What would you use the funding for?
My summer plan, obviously COVID permitting, is it's thrown everything up in the air, hasn't it? I looked at a majority of the seals at the British Museum, but due to time constraints, I've still got 20 to 30 that I would really like to look at, as well as I'm starting to get into the writing up stage. A grant would be a great help if we're talking blue sky thinking and the opportunity presents itself due to travel restrictions and whatnot. I would really, really on the cylinder seal collection at the Cyprus Museum at whether or not that's possible, we will have to see. But yeah, that would be fantastic and a big help. But predominantly, I'll be finishing off my database and starting to really write up my analysis of the cylinders that I've looked at, and also the cylinders from other site reports.
Yeah, that's a lot of cylinder seals. A question from the audience: what iconography do you see on Cypriot cylinder seals, and are they visually different to seals from the Near East?
They can be. The common style seals are very, very distinct. They're blocky. They tend to be very schematic, but they still have some commonality with the find on derivative and elaborate style seals. Elaborate style seals tend to be visually similar to those that you find in the Middle East, but with iconographic flourishes that you don't find in Near Eastern seals. One of which is the inclusion of pointy shoes, which is probably a Anatolian introduced from Anatolia, because the up-tilted shoe tends to, by the late Bronze Age, became associated with kings and kings and whatnot in Anatolian iconography, and also into like northern Syria, which was fairly solidly under Hittite control at the time. And you get those on Cypriot cylinder seals that you are otherwise fairly visually similar to Babylonian and Egyptian, well, not so much Egyptian seals, but Babylonian seals and those from the Levant, but they've got the pointy shoe. The introduction of oxide ingots also appear on several classes of seals. They tend to appear on, they're most prominent on common style seals, common style seals, but they also appear fairly regularly on elaborate and derivative style seals. They also include the sacred tree or tree of life, which is fairly ubiquitous throughout the region. But they put their own flourishes on it. They're engraved slightly differently. They've got their own style to them. Animals often, which again, pretty ubiquitous in the region, particularly ibexes or antelopes or goats. It's often difficult to tell which is which. It's a four-legged antlered animal, or horned animal rather. When you're writing that, it gets a bit old to keep repeating it. So the shorthand tends to be just a goat or an ibex. Sacrificial scenes, seated figures, birds, like I said, as animal-headed figures, which again you do find in other iconographic traditions, glyptic traditions, but all with like a slight Cypriot twist to them. For instance, goat-headed humanoid figurines, they'll often have both horns elaborated, whereas ones from the Levant and other parts of the Near East tend to only have the one. So there's a slight perspective shift to them. The fairly distinctive on Cypriot iconography, especially in the elaborate style seals, how the figures are proportioned is also fairly distinctive. You get with Cypriot style seals, they tend to be broad-shouldered and narrow-waisted, whereas in Babylonian and other glyptic traditions, they tend to be a bit more straight up and down. The differences are subtle, but they are definitely there.
Yeah. So another question, is there any reference in the Cypriot seals of ingredients, food, or culinary practices?
Not that I've seen. Not any that I've seen in site reports or in various museum collections. They tend to be a bit less mundane in their depictions. It's either something to do with the supernatural. I use that term in inverted commas because obviously we're not quite sure how they viewed these things. But so fantastical beasts or animals or sacrificial scenes. Sometimes they're just geometric shapes and like abstract scenes, or just a random object, especially on the common style seals. You'll often see oxide ingots and circles with dots in middle, and then just lines and various other things. So no, that would be awesome, but not that I'm aware of now.
Yeah. And is there any evidence of workshops for cylinder seal making on Cyprus, or?
There is one that's been found, and it's from Ankeny. It was excavated by Dikaios in the, I want to say 60s, but I could be wrong. It's been a while since I looked at it. And it dates to the LC2 period, which is fairly late. That's about 1300 to 1200. One would assume I knew the dates, but I tend to deal with the relative chronology more often, so yeah. I could be wrong on that. But it's definitely from the LC2 period, late LC1 or to LC2 period, so which is actually quite late in terms of seals on Cyprus. That's at least 2 to 3 centuries after Cypriot iconography starts to appear.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've only got the one, unfortunately, which begs a number of questions about, well, who was making these? Was it Cypriots? Was it craftsmen that were brought in from abroad? Were they being made abroad with particular Cypriot flair? I don't tend to agree with that interpretation, but if it was foreign craftspeople, there's relatively clear agreement that it was likely foreign craftspeople at the beginning. So when they were first starting to carve their own seals, but beyond that, we have yet to find any other seal workshops, which is interesting and also frustrating at the same time.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, this has been really interesting to hear about. I'm looking forward to your results when you have them out. And I think we'll wrap up there. But thank you so much for coming and talking about your work.
No, you're welcome. It's been great fun. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Have a good day.
You too. Hi.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Fine. Can you hear me well?
Yep, you're all good. All right, so why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and take us through your research?
Right. So my name is Joshua Greenberg, and I'm happy you found time for me after all my cancellations, but I had no choice. Now, about my research, my thesis, my doctorate thesis, is actually an article doctorate. I don't know if you know. In the Hebrew University, you can write articles, different art. Okay, now the theme is Judah and Babylon in the Second Temple days. Usually, the Second Temple day history discipline is studying ancient Greek because the Hellenist sources are the main sources. Josephus Flavius and the Maccabees books and so on. But I chose a different path, trying to understand Judea through the continuance of the Mesopotamian world, which the Hebrew nation was part of for many years. Not only the Mesopotamian world, but the Semite world, which Mesopotamia was the greatest. I mean, they had the greatest empires, Assur and Babylon. So if you do not understand Judea as a continuity of this culture, then you lack many things. And studying Greek drives you out of this context. So I chose this unique path, and my counselor, Professor Wayne Horowitz, helped me out with that. And so one article of the thesis is, or the dissertation is about the Al Yahudu tablets. Al Yahudu tablets are tablets from Jewish settlement in Babylon of exiles, Second Temple, which were resettled in Babylon. And these tablets are mainly loans. But not only. And you find Judean names there and so on. And you can make some assumptions and conclusions through going into these tablets. This is what I have done. First, I've translated it into Hebrew with Professor Horowitz and Peter Zilberg, and it was already published here in Israel. But what I did later on is I made a table out of all these tablets, the main details of each tablet, and through this you could understand things. I mean, you could get to conclusions, you could deduce things about their lives, and I think also it's also maybe about the halacha, about the maintaining the Jewish law. Maybe you can also deduce something about that. And so this is one of the chapters, which is very long because of all this great table and the understandings and so on. Now, another chapter is about the creation of the sects of the Sadducees and Pharisees. I claim that they originated in the Persian era, in the Persian period, and I connect this with the mandate that Ezra, the scribe, received from Artaxerxes, and especially the part that where he is his assignment is to establish a jurisdiction, I think, system in Judea, and to appoint judges which will follow the law of God, which means there in that context the Torah, and a comparison between the law of the king, which is the Persian king, and the law of God, which means it makes out the law of God becomes the law of the king through that. And I think this is the main point in understanding how it developed later on into the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and I could expand on that if you really want to hear. Just I'll continue on. Now the third chapter is about Antiochus Epiphanes, the fourth, Antiochus the fourth, and what he did here in Jerusalem. And I compare between a rebellion, the Maccabees rebellion, in a very important and crucial stage of it, And at the same time, it was the summer of 162 BC, if I remember correctly. I think it was 62 or not 63. It's been a while since I've been into it. And in the same period, in the same summer, there was a rebellion in Babylon against Antiochus Epiphanes, and we can see that from two different tablets. One appearing in the astronomic journals, and one in a tablet that Finkel and Van der Spek published, not really published, put on the internet, right? And so these two tablets show us that there was a very strong rebellion in Babylon, in the city of Babylon, at the same time, in the same period, and by comparing between the two rebellions and the status, and also about that we can see in these journals, we can see that the same things, same main steps that Antiochus Epiphanes did in Jerusalem, he did also in Babylon. And this is against the ruling theory today that against what is written in Maccabees 1, that Antiochus Epiphanes requested, he wanted to make out of all the peoples in his empire, to make one people, which will believe in Zeus and so on. And the scholars today are in opinion that it is a Central Judaic point of view, but rather we do not see any evidence in the rest of the empire for the same steps that support this theory or this saying of the author of Maccabees 1. But I show that he did the same thing in Babylon altogether, so which shows that the author of Maccabees 1 did know what he was saying. And so this is the third article, and it's enough to hold a dissertation. Now, if you really want, I could go into depth a bit into all these. I mean, expand into about all these, if you really wished. If you really wish me to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you have one that's more or less related to what you were thinking this summer you would really tackle, you could elaborate on that one? Or is it just generally you're working?
First of all, I'm a working person. I mean, I don't work in the academy. For me, it doesn't matter if it's summer or winter or autumn or spring. If I have the money to write, I'll gladly have it. So it doesn't matter. I mean, you're talking about summer. Okay, summer, let it be. There is one reason I would like to see a tablet in the British Museum. It's broken, and it's broken like all the tablets from the Neo-Babylonian period. It's broken really in the most crucial point. What's written there is that Antiochus Epiphanes, or actually the priest that worked on behalf of him, he took some gold that was donated to the temple, and he did something for the glory of Marduk. Now, Marduk in this case could also be Zeus, because they used. We see from Borassus that they called Marduk. They called Zeus Marduk, or Marduk Zeus. Yes. So now, what exactly did he do there? We don't know. It's broken. And the thing is that we know what he did in the Temple of Jerusalem. He put a statue of Zeus in the Holy of Holies, which is most forbidden in the Judean eyes or in Jewish eyes, because the Torah is against statues, no statues and so on. It's prohibited. But then there is a Maccabees book. He uses a very strange language, and no one really understands what it means. He calls it Shikutz Meshomem. What is the meaning of that word Meshomem? No one understands. Many theories. Now, maybe we have a clue in that tablet, in the broken place, that could lead us. Maybe it's an influence from a Babylonian word. I don't know. It's a hypothesis. It's a hypothesis. It's a theory. But there is some breakage there in the British Museum where they hold the tablet. Maybe we could put some breakage together and find some rubble together, and we can find the real world. I know it's a dream. I don't know if it'll come true. But if it will, then it will prove also a connection between Babylon and Judea. This is one thing that maybe I could do. I would very much like to do. And there is so this whole theory is quite innovative when you talk about what today is believed to be true about what happened in Babylon and Judea. Now, the other chapter that I'm working on about the origins of the Pharisees and Sadducees is most fascinating, because when you compare what happened in Judea and what happened in Babylon, well, you can see that in Babylon, at that period of the first millennium BCE, and especially in the period of Second Temple days, when we compare the periods, I mean the late Babylonian period and the Achaemenic period and the Hellenistic period and the Parthian period, at the same period, which is we Jews consider as Second Temple days, or historians consider Second Temple days. The same day, the same period, happened two things. Well, there was a part of the Mesopotamian corpus was canonized. That started to happen towards the end of the second millennium BCE, but majorly what happened in about since the 8th century BCE, we can find commentary because it was canonized. They started writing commentary, and they started writing commentaries on divination texts, on the medical texts, on and so on. And etc. Right, and at this point of what we call Second Temple days, this hermeneutics or this exegesis is called Shutpi, Mashal Tuumani, or Shapi Mashal, which means from the mouth of the Umanu, of the sages. Now, the Jewish name of the Jewish interpretation that was quite established in these days of Second Temple days is called Torah shebe'al peh, according to the mouth, on the mouth, so oral. So Shapi is also oral, and we can see that they used very similar techniques. Now, people have been writing about it already, but what I try to claim is that Ezra did both things. He canonized the scriptures on one hand, and at the same time he started this kind of commentary on the text. And this was the point of the division between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The Sadducees did not accept this canonization. They continued on writing here and there, amending, adding a bit, subtracting a bit, while the Pharisees rejected that in any form, no adding, nothing, full canonization. And that's why they needed these hermeneutics, and they needed it, or these exegesis, they needed, because if you look at the code, the law code in the Torah, you find that it's very, very, very laconic. So if Ezra really wanted to establish a system of judges and so on, which will rule according to the Torah, he couldn't have done it without these exegesis. Okay, not like in the First Temple days where there was a king and he could decide what the law is going to be. Here there was no Jewish king. So actually Ezra used the fact that there's no Jewish king in order to make the scripture, put the scripture instead of the king, canonize the scripture, and this henceforth start the Torah shebe'al peh, this way of commentary. And this is where they divided. The priests in the temple, which were the Sadducees, which we called later on the Sadducees, rejected the canonization so they could add, they could change a bit. The Pharisees rejected this rejection, and that's why they used their interpretation. Using their interpretation, after all, gave them much more flexibility than the Sadducees, because the Sadducees were obliged to this bits of text, while the Pharisees develop the whole world because it was dependent on them, on their interpretations. So I think this is where they separated. Now, this is my theory, but I yet have to work on it, and there are tablets to read and so on. So here it's in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, that's incredibly interesting and thorough, and it sounds like you're going to produce a lot of good work.
Thank you.
So I think that's it. Thank you so much for coming and talking about that, and good luck in the future in writing up this interesting work.
Thank you. Good night.
Right.
Thank you for listening to me.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you, Melina, so much for your help doing all of the interviews. Everybody, Melina was wonderful. Give her a round of applause in your chairs or wherever it is that you're watching from. Thank you, Melina. I'm going to take a quick 2 minutes to talk to people about voting and the donation system. So, Melina, if you want to hop off, you are more than welcome to.
Thank you.
Bye. Everyone, that was the wonderful Melina. Thank you again to her so much for taking over interviews this afternoon. I love doing interviews, but it can get quite tiring. So having people like Melina and Sarah and EL who are willing to step in and kind of man it for me is very much appreciated. So that concludes all of our HAPS interviews for this year. We are officially done. We have spoken to in the region of 53 people, which I think is an amazing achievement. Thank you to everyone who has watched the interviews. We've had some wonderful questions, wonderful research. I've thoroughly enjoyed myself. If you are a HAPS donor, then you will receive an email tomorrow or Tuesday with information on how to vote for your 4 favorite research topics. We have enough money to fund 4 students this summer, so you get to vote for 4 people. I understand that going back through 53 applications is a little bit difficult and very time consuming. So I will be putting some notes and crib sheets in the emails so that you can kind of flick through and see, like, refresh your memory, see what you remember being interesting, and then if you want to, you can read their applications or rewatch the interviews. If you have not donated to HAPS and you would like to have a say in which students are funded, it is not too late. As long as you donate before tomorrow morning, so that's, let's say, 9 a.m. EDT on Monday, the 24th of May, 2021. As long as you donate before then, you will receive the email with all of the voting information. Any donation, any amount will get you a vote. So if you are interested in that, go to hapsfund.com/donate. It's been put in the side chat by our helpful friend Zebra. Thank you very much, Zebra. Yes, and stay tuned. The channel is going to be a bit quiet for a while because I'm essentially going on maternity leave, but we will be back. It will be amazing. And actually, having said we'll gone quiet, we'll probably be here on Friday with Josh's new book launch. So maybe we'll see you on Friday. It's a mystery. Anyway, thank you again. I'm going to stop rambling and I'm going to go. But it's been a delight and a pleasure.